Hi everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IS in English. My name is Bhanwar Singh, MX NDA 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012. And I welcome you on the platform. Now, we know that when it comes to the West Asian crisis, the crisis have unfolded right from 28th of February when US have launched the attacks over the Iran alongside with the Israel. Now, since then, the complete region, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, it has remained quite fragile. And at the same time, we have seen that there was a ceasefire that was stuck between Iran and USA. But later on, what had happened was that during that fragile ceasefire as well, there were some of the skirmishes between both the nations. At the same time, when it comes to the MOU was recently signed between US and Iran, which had promised that there will be 60 days of the ceasefire in the region. But at the same time, we have seen the escalations of the threats and even the escalation of the fighting between both the nations, as we are seeing currently that we have also lost one of the Indian into the complete perspective, or you can say the dilemma that is there. Now, over here, there is a question that was raised in my mind as I was going through the complete issue, and it is that why does US military intervention in the Middle East, it is so consistently produce the next crisis rather than resolving the one that it had targeted. Now, this is a pattern that I'm talking about which spans the 5 interventions and 23 years where we have seen the interventions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, and now that is there in the Iran. Now, this is worth examining structurally rather than by case basis. So we'll be going through all of this, and we'll be seeing that how this happens and how this pattern it repeats itself when it comes to US and the Middle East region while moving forward in this video. Just be with me, but before moving ahead, let me tell you that we are offering you with the lowest price drop that is there on the platform of StudyIQ, and you can enroll into the courses which are available on the platform by using the code that is BRS Live. That will fetch you the maximum discount that will be available on the platform of StudyIQ at that point of time. Now, over here, this is quite important that this is the complete timeline when it comes to 2001. So it was when the US had invaded Afghanistan. It was a 20-year occupation that have ended in weeks, and Taliban, it has retaken the country as the US withdraws. And there are the billions in the equipment that had been abandoned in the Afghanistan. At the same time, when it comes to Iraq, the invasion was in 2003, and here the invasion have toppled the regime of Saddam Hussein, and there was army and the Ba'ath party that were dissolved with no replacement that was there in the state, and that had led to the insurgency in Iraq, followed by the capture of the complete Iraq by the ISIS in 2014. Now, when it comes to Libya, it was in 2011 that there were the forces, especially the NATO air campaign, that have toppled the regime of Gaddafi. There was no stabilization plan that was for the future, and the country, it had fractured into the rival governments and militias. There is the arms flow that started flowing into the Sahel region of the Africa that we have seen later on. Now, when it comes to the next campaign was in 2014, where it was in Syria, and ultimately the US-led anti-ISIS campaign was launched, which left the residual troop presence and resolved Kurdish question as well that have strained the US and Turkey ties as well. Now, at the same time, in February 2026, we have seen on 28th that US had started these strikes over the Iran that have killed the Supreme Leader Khamenei, and Iran had responded with the missile or the drone attacks and closed the Strait of Hormuz. Later on, there was a ceasefire that was signed in April 2026, and the 40-day war, it ended in the ceasefire that was stuck between both the nations in April. A June memorandum which have set the 60-day negotiation window on the nuclear fire as well. But as we see that Iran have strike over the tankers which are there in the strait, which have led to the killing of one of the Indian as well, and US have resumed the strike for the 3rd consecutive nights. The Hormuz traffic that we are talking about right now, right from 10th of July to 12th of July, it has fallen over 50% just over a week. So we are talking about the various invasions that US have led, like for example, it is Libya or Syria or Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan as well, and that have actually not resolved the conflicts which were there, or they have not resolved the problems which were there, but they have also reignited the future unpredictable course of the history. So these are the 4 cases that you can see. In the Iraq, what has happened in 2003? There was a regime change, and at the same time, there was the occupation of the Iraq as well. Later on, what had overcome, or what had been the outcome of the complete toppling of this regime? So in Iraq, there was the sectarian civil war, and there was the birth of ISIS in 2014 as well. And ultimately, this have cost more than $2 trillion to $2 trillion to the US forces as well. All right, now when it comes to Libya, so there was air campaign and there was no ground plan, and the state had collapsed. There was twin rival governments, and there had been the regional arms spillover in Libya as well that have threatened the safety and security of the nationals in the North African state. Then when it comes to Afghanistan, there was a 20-year state building attempt that was led by US troops, and ultimately right now we are seeing that there had been Taliban which have restored just within weeks of the US forces withdrawal. And when it comes to 2014, the campaign was launched against Syria. There was counter-ISIS campaign. There was partial footprint that was present in the country as well. But then it had led to the fragmented control, unresolved Kurdish question, and even there had been the friction that was there with the Turkey as well, because Syria, it borders Turkey also. Now, when it comes to the complete 2026 Iran war, what had happened was that ultimately the US-Israeli strike, they have killed Khamenei on 28th of February 2026, leading to the death of the supreme leader amid the nuclear talks that were running since April 2025. Ultimately, the Iran, it had shut the Strait of Hormuz, hit the Gulf US bases and the Arab states as well. And the Hezbollah opened up a second front that was against Israel from the Lebanon. There was also a 40-day war that actually ended on the 8th of April ceasefire. The talks collapsed once at Islamabad between 12th and 13th April. And there was a June MOU which have set a window for 60 days ceasefire. There would have been the nuclear file, the sanctions relief, and safe shipping through the Hormuz as well that was promised. But at the same time, when it comes to the current state, that is between 13th to 15th of July, you can see that there had been Iran strikes on the container ship that is Ever Lonely, and two of the Emirati tankers in the strait, and US have resumed the strikes for the third straight night on 13th of July. Now, the Brent crude, which we have seen before as well, because of the crisis, it had jumped over 9% in just single day. This is the sharpest rise in 6 years on the blockade fears of the Strait of Hormuz once again. Hormuz crossings, they have been down to nearly about 52% week-on-week basis, and ultimately the Saudi Arabia and the Houthi truce, they have broken down. The Jordan intercepted the Iranian missiles, and even the Turkey-Israel tensions, they have sharpened over the period of this particular period that we are talking about. And Mojtaba Khamenei, who have succeeded the supreme leader of the Iran, he has been seen as more hardline than his father. He had taken over as the supreme leader, despite that there had been the US objections to his succession. Now, this is quite important because the complete issue is you can say that it is a wider implication that we can see of the complete issue. Now, when it comes to the political implication, you can see that this is about removing a regime without a legitimate successor that have invited the contest for power, and this had been often violent in all these 5 of the interceptions that had been done by the US. Among the factions, the older order, they had been suppressed. So they again rise up after the complete, operations that had been over in these 5 of the various countries that we are talking about. At the same time, there had been dismantled armies and the intelligence network. They don't disappear. Their personnel and the weapons, they re-enter the conflict as the insurgents or the militias, and thereby this has the security implication as well for the whole of the Middle East region. Also, there is oil transit choke points. They turn regional wars into the global shocks that we are seeing right now in the case of Strait of Hormuz, where Brent crude, it has jumped more than 9% in single day this week, which actually shows that the transmission had sped up. Then we have the humanitarian crisis as well, which is at large. We have the civilian displacement and even the infrastructure damage that create the refugee flows that destabilize the neighboring states for a complete generation. And also there is a geopolitical implication where there is a vacuum which invites the external powers, like for example Russia and Syria or Libya or the rival regional powers, which will come up to fill the vacuum on the terms which are unfavorable to the US interest. And that is what we are seeing, or what we are talking about, that when it comes to the US interventions or the operations in the Middle East, they have created more of the problem than what it had solved. But at the same time, this issue is where we have the Indian stakes as well. When it comes to the energy security, we know that India imports nearly about more than 80 to 85% of the crude oil, and there is a sustained Hormuz disruption that directly impacts the import bill as well. All right, and even there is an inflation risk, as we have seen in the past, where the petroleum prices, they were raised by the government, and even there was the risk or the problem for the LPG as well. So there could be the LPG crisis also. There's diaspora and the remittances, where we have nearly 9 million of the Indians, they live and work across the Gulf. So evacuation and remittance flow risk, they will rise with each escalation cycles that will be there. Then there is shipping and trade as well, where Indian flagged and Indian bound vessels transit Hormuz regularly, and war risk insurance premiums are already climbing when we are talking about the region. And there is the strategic autonomy test as well, because ultimately when it comes to India's geopolitical relations with the countries which are involved, whether it is US, whether it is Israel, whether it is Iran, or even the Gulf nations which are there, so we have to balance the ties with them simultaneously, which is a live case study when it comes to non-alignment 2.0, or India's strategic autonomy that we are talking about. So this is all about the 5 interventions that were done by the US in the region, in the Middle East, and there is only one pattern that we are seeing, that there was the regime that was removed. Then there was a vacuum which was created because of that regime which was removed. Ultimately, there was the insurgency or the proxy war which started in the region that led to the regional spillover, and ultimately there was the next crisis which was waiting for the Middle East. So this is the lesson that we can take from the US intervention that we have seen in the Middle East region. So that would be all in today's session, but do not forget that I have told you that we are offering you with the lowest price offer, and ultimately you can use the code that is BRS Live for enrolling into the GS Foundation batch that we have. For the evening batch that we have just started, so you can enroll into this. This is a resolution P2I batch that I'm talking about. Alright, so that would be all. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me over here. But do not forget to like the session, do share this session with your friends, and even subscribe if you have not subscribed it yet, so that you do not miss any of the future updates. Thank you, bye-bye, take care, and Jai Hind.